You're watching Race to Power. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. In a few hours from now, President Donald Trump will be addressing his country, and the world is waiting anxiously to hear what he has to say. Will he end the war? Will the United States pull out of NATO? Well, these are the big questions, and we talk about what to expect from the Trump address. And here in India, the country has begun the world's largest census from today, a significant exercise which will help in not just getting the numbers, but also in shaping policies, welfare schemes, and the road ahead. First, let's talk about the Iran war. The Iran war has created a rupture within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO as it is called. The Western consensus, as it existed for 77 years, is now under unprecedented strain. In a recent interview with the British Daily Telegraph, the US President Donald Trump has said that removing his country from NATO is now beyond reconsideration. Trump once again called NATO a paper tiger and added that he doubts NATO's credibility. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also reiterated this. He said that the United States will have to re-examine the ties with NATO after the ongoing conflict in Iran.
So I think there's no doubt, unfortunately, after this conflict is concluded, we are going to have to re-examine that relationship. We're going to have to re-examine the value of NATO and that alliance for our country. Ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make, and he'll have to make it. We're going to finish the job here.
America and Israel's war against Iran has left American allies in a bind. The point of contention remains the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has closed for US and Israel-linked vessels. The president earlier urged allies to step in to open the strait, but NATO countries have refused to do so. Instead, several NATO countries have openly condemned the military strikes on Iran. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that it was not Britain's war.
Firstly, NATO is the single most effective military alliance the world has ever seen, and it has kept us safe for many decades, and we are fully committed to NATO. Secondly, that whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make. And that's why I've been absolutely clear that this is not our war, and we're not going to get dragged into it.
Other NATO allies like Spain and Italy have blocked American forces from using their bases for strikes on Iran. In fact, Spain has closed its airspace for any US military movement that involves strikes against Iran. Italy has refused authorization for some US aircraft which were headed to West Asia on a combat mission. The aircraft sought permission to land at its Sigonella base. Another NATO ally, France, has only allowed America's logistical transport aircraft to land on its bases. US President Donald Trump has previously said that he will remember NATO's response on the Iran war. He's also added that Washington may not help NATO in future if it's asked to do so. If this is put into action, Europe will have serious security concerns. The United States, remember, is the single largest contributor to NATO's security umbrella. There are about 85,000 US troops stationed across Europe. The Big Five, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and Boeing all contribute around 50% of the total arms supplies to Europe. Defense equipment, offensive firepower, and intelligence sharing. Europe's security is powered by American military-industrial complex. And if Trump indeed pulls the US out of NATO, the Western consensus would enter in a downward spiral, which would be difficult to reverse. All right, let me welcome Mr. Joachim Bittele. He's a former German ambassador to NATO. He's joining us live on the broadcast from Paris. Good evening. Welcome to WION, sir. What are you expecting? In a few hours from now, the US president is going to be addressing his nation. The entire world has its eyes on Washington, D.C. Are you expecting the US to pull out of NATO today?
I don't think so. I'm relatively relaxed about this, even if we have to review deeply the whole system of NATO. It's clear. I suppose Donald Trump will announce the end of war in the Middle East.
Okay. So if that's the case, how do you see the NATO-US relationship post this war, whenever it ends, and if that announcement does come today? How do you see that? Because Donald Trump has been quite frustrated with his NATO allies. He's been voicing his opinions time and again. And Marco Rubio has said that we will be reassessing our ties with the NATO countries. And therefore, how do you see this moving forward?
To a certain extent, I have to understand Donald Trump, because his NATO allies are refusing to support him directly. They refer, yes, we will come once you have established peace. The NATO allies in Europe say, well, it's not our war, but at the same time, it's a war which is, let's say, touching, which is concerning our vital European interests at the same time. And it's true, on the one side, it's not an attack against NATO here that would launch, let's say, the NATO defense in this case. No, it's not the case. It's a case outside of NATO. And therefore, to some extent, well, we have to understand the Americans. And Donald Trump, well, is saying, well, we always have been at your disposal in Europe. We have always been supporting you, defending you, and now, once you have to defend us, you are not here with us. It's understandable, but on the other hand, this war in the Middle East is to be looked at with different eyes at the same time. It's in our interest that the threat from Iran is to be ended, yes, it's clear. On the other hand, we are not convinced by all the means Americans and Israelis use, and therefore, Donald Trump is reacting a bit, let's call it furiously, calling NATO a paper tiger, but this paper tiger has been preventing any war, any attack on Europe for the last 60 years. And even if he adds, Putin knows our lack of credibility. Well, if there had been no credibility of NATO, Putin would have perhaps attacked NATO, but it's not the case. Therefore, I understand the politician who reacts a bit in a furious way, because the Americans, in my eyes, have done basic, I will not call this mistakes. They have been underestimating the Iranian side. I understand that they have been trying to strike the leadership. They have been trying to strike their capabilities on ballistic missiles. They have been trying to strike their capabilities on nuclear. But why the American strategists have been totally forgetting the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz? Perhaps not for the Europeans, but for utmost importance for the whole of Asia, for India, for Pakistan, for Japan, the Philippines and others. Why the Americans have been underestimating totally this side? I can't understand it, frankly spoken.
So, Ambassador Bitterle, help me understand this. While you're saying that NATO is right in its place for not getting directly involved in this conflict, Donald Trump has been putting up this posture more so because of his domestic reasons. But do you not think that American strategists understand that there are multiple US bases across NATO countries and defense arms and ammunition that are stored there across European countries that, that helps America fight its wars?
But please, you have been showing us the map. And if you look at the map of Europe, and if you look at the region, it's normal the Americans need, clearly, for example, the Ramstein Air Base, which is the most important in Central Europe, in order to transmit anything direction Ukraine, anything transmitting direction Israel or the whole Middle East or Asia, is of utmost importance. And we don't see that the Americans will give up this. What we have to do with the Americans is to talk openly with them that Europe is ready to take over a greater responsibility in defense, yes, but Europeans have to prepare this urgently, urgently, yes.
Okay.
It's time to do it. We have to develop this in a short range of time, yes. And we have to develop a new relationship with the Americans. We have been, let's say, establish a certain consultation process insofar, but the Europeans themselves have to take over more and a greater responsibility for themselves and for, let's say, the whole neighborhood around Europe.
Okay.
It's clear.
Okay. So what you're saying, sir, is, how you say in German, it's going to have to be a Guten Tag for the relationship between NATO and America. But I'll leave it there, sir. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective and helping us get a better understanding of this. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure for me.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about American President Donald Trump, who signed an executive order to crack down on mail-in voting, aiming to tighten the rules for voting by mail across the country. Now, this order essentially directs officials to compile a list of verified voters in each state, limit absentee ballots to approved lists, and mandate secure envelopes with unique tracking barcodes. Any attempt to impose changes on state-run election systems is likely to face immediate legal challenges. However, despite opposing mail-in voting, Trump cast his own ballot by mail-in a Florida special election last week.
So here's the idea. The states, right, run these elections. They will, if they want to use the U.S. mail, the U.S. Postal Service, they're going to get a code, a barcode from the U.S. Postal Service, and they're going to put that on the envelope, and we will have one envelope per vote. None of this time where we have no idea, there's no observers to mail, there's no envelopes, there's no certainty.
Meanwhile, Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs criticized Donald Trump's latest executive order, indicating that Trump has no authority to change U.S. election procedures. For years, remember, Trump has pushed false claims about his 2020 election defeat and called for tighter mail-in voting rules ahead of the November midterm elections as Republicans defend the narrow congressional majorities. Polls show Republican Party risks losing their narrow grip on the Congress, with Democrats vowing to block his agenda and possibly pursue impeachment. This, remember, as Trump's push for stricter voting rules could dampen the turnout in tight races. Earlier as well, Trump used executive action to direct federal agencies to verify voter citizenship and sought to bar states from counting mail ballots received after the election day and therefore challenging the traditional state-run election procedures. And more news from the United States of America. It is an important day in court for Donald Trump as the hearing on the Birthright citizenship case has begun. Just moments ago, Trump's motorcard arrived at the U.S. Supreme Court as one of the most consequential cases began. The American president is sitting in first row of the public section of the courtroom as the Supreme Court hears arguments on his appeal of a lower court ruling from New Hampshire that had struck down the citizenship restrictions. Many other courts had also struck Donald Trump's executive order, which has so far not been implemented in any state. Donald Trump, in an executive order last year, remember, had declared that children born to parents who are in the United States illegally or temporarily are not American citizens. The current constitutional provisions can be found in the 14th Amendment that gives citizenship to everyone born on American soil. However, this regulation excludes children of diplomats and foreign military personnel. All right, let me go across to our colleague Susan Teherani joining us live from New York at the moment. Susan, this is a big day for Donald Trump. In a few hours from now, he's going to be addressing the nation, but of course, get us more of what has been happening there.
The U.S. Supreme Court is hearing a landmark case that could reshape American citizenship. At issue is President Trump's executive order, which would end automatic birthright citizenship for children born in the United States if their parents are not citizens or permanent residents. Now, this has caused a lot of controversy, not only among those that oppose this executive order, but in lower courts as well. Hence, the case going to the Supreme Court. For the first time, President Trump is going to be present at oral arguments, the first president in U.S. history to do so. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World as One.
All right, shifting our focus now, after the Israeli parliament, the Knesset passed the controversial death penalty law. Reactions have been pouring in. The new law, remember, approves death penalty for Palestinians who've been convicted of terrorism and murdering Israelis. The death penalty law has now drawn sharp criticism from the international community and rights groups as discriminatory and inhumane. The legislation also puts Israel at odds with the broader trend toward abolishing capital punishment altogether. The European Union has condemned this bill, allowing the execution of Palestinians convicted on terror charges for the deadly attacks.
The death penalty bill in Israel is very concerning to us in the EU. This is a clear step backwards. The introduction of the death penalty, together with the discriminatory nature of the law.
Criticizing the law, the United Nations warned that the law, if applied in Palestinian territory, would amount to a war crime. Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has condemned the approval by Israel as well, calling it a step closer to apartheid, also noting how this measure applies differently for Israelis and Palestinians.
We will always stand firm against such decisions, which clearly represent a radical shift that we will always condemn in the strongest terms.
On the other hand, Germany said that it could not endorse the Israeli law and views its passing with great concern. Meanwhile, Palestinians gathered in the Gaza city to protest against the Israeli death penalty law for Palestinians.
الذي اقترحه المجرم الصهيوني بالصوت ضع عنقي على السكين خلف القضبان فليتقدم الأسير المحرر أن نبني هذه الاستراتيجية.
Hamas, meanwhile, has slammed the death penalty law, calling it blatantly racist and reflects what it described as Israel's policy of killing and terrorism.
The Israeli Knesset's approval of the law to execute Palestinian prisoners in this form is a blatantly racist law. It is one of the ugliest manifestations of Zionist racism against our Palestinian people and an extension of the desire to exterminate the Palestinian people wherever they are. This law contradicts all international laws and resolutions.
In London, protesters gathered at the Whitehall condemning the law.
That is outside of all international human rights action, and this is a new waves of criminal activities by state terrorism. So this is really a big mistake, and we should stand very loud and strong against this.
Israel, remember, had abolished the death penalty for murder back in 1954. The only person who's been executed in Israel after a civilian trial was Adolf Eichmann, who's an architect of the Nazi Holocaust in 1962. Military courts in the occupied West Bank can impose death sentences on Palestinians, though none have been carried out so far. Let's shift our focus now to India. India is undertaking the world's largest census exercise. This will be, remember, India's 16th census and the 8th since independence. Last such exercise was conducted in 2011. 36 states and federally administered territories, more than 7,000 sub-districts, over 9,700 towns, and nearly 640,000 villages will be covered in the two-phase census. The Government of India has approved a budget of 11,718 crore rupees for the census. The cost involves technology, logistics and training. A total of 3 million people will be involved in this entire exercise. The process will also have a digital touch. For the first time, enumerators will receive and submit the data via a mobile application. People can log into the application using their phone number and fill the details digitally. This will replace traditional paper-based system. A list of 33 questions have already been prepared. The first phase will cover household conditions. People will be asked to provide details on amenities and assets, availability of basic necessities like water, sanitation, electricity, and access to internet. They will also be covered during this phase. The second phase will focus on population enumeration. That's scheduled for February 2027, when detailed data on demographics, education, migration, and fertility will be collected.
दुनिया के हिसाब से चलना है तो कैसे करिएगा मैनेज क्या करता आपका
Hungary is counting down to parliamentary elections on the 12th of April. The upcoming polls will be a critical test for Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who, remember, seeks to extend his 16-year rule. Orbán was seen campaigning in Otsa on Tuesday this week. Addressing his supporters at a rally, the incumbent leader pressed on with his anti-Ukraine messaging. Orbán claimed election interference to install a pro-Ukraine government in Hungary.
Now is not the time for taking risks, for change, for uncertainty, or for adventurism. We may have to try new things someday, but I am absolutely certain that the next 4 years will not be the time for that. Over the next 4 years, we'll need a clear head and steady hands to protect everything we've worked so hard for.
Viktor Orbán faces the toughest challenge since 2010 from political rival Peter Magyar. The opposition leader of Tisza party is far ahead of Orbán in the popularity polls, having an almost 20% lead ahead of the critical elections. Orbán, remember, has been the longest-serving leader in European Union so far, but Hungary's voters will decide if that changes in 12 days from now. And from one election to the other, it is officially election month in Peru. 35 candidates are contesting to become the country's next president. Tuesday witnessed the final round of the televised debate between the candidates. Poverty, corruption, and organized crime emerged as the biggest issues that presidential hopefuls made promises on.
En 10 años,
In 10 years, 1990-2000, 3 million Peruvians were lifted out of poverty and millions of families gained access to education and basic services. But in the last 25 years, no government has pushed forward with the same vigor. We have stagnated, chaos has returned, and today it governs us.
We have no security, no water, no education, no food, no healthcare, no public transport, nothing. All because of corruption, points at Keiko Fujimori, or political pettiness.
I would like to begin by pointing out that the country is in the state it is in, effectively in chaos, due to political decisions that are deplorable, self-serving, and of course abusive, which have been taken by Congress and approved by the executive.
Como por el Fujimorismo, así que son responsables. Eso impide la persecución del crimen organizado.
Voters in Peru go to polls on the 12th of April amid years of political instability. The country has witnessed short-lived leadership of 9 presidents in the last 10 years. France has taken a major step towards banning social media for teenagers. The country's upper house has now approved a draft law that bans social media access for children under the age of 15. French President Emmanuel Macron wants the law to take effect by September this year. If adopted, France will be the second country after Australia to ban social media platforms for 15-year-olds. The lower house of the French Parliament approved the legislation as a blanket ban, but senators have introduced some amendments that restrict the ban to platforms that are considered harmful for children. A list of these harmful social media platforms will be decided at a later date. Now, this proposed amendment has paved the way for a back and forth between the two chambers of the French Parliament. But the lower house has the final word on the legislation. France, remember, is not the only one. Countries around Europe, in fact, have been considering ways to restrict social media for minors, citing risks to children. Last week, a jury in Los Angeles delivered a landmark judgment. They ordered Facebook's parent company, Meta, and Alphabet's Google to pay damages for designing social media platforms which are harmful to young people. All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. But as always, we will keep getting you analysis from across the world. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye-bye.
Get the latest updates.
Destroy their
Breaking
missiles
news.
and raise their...
Credible, clear, continuous. Experts across aisles. Diverse voices, one platform. WION World is one. In-depth coverage of global issues broken down into facts, figures, and simple words. Backed with analysis from field experts who truly matter, because we believe in decoding the real picture for you. So you get a much wider and deeper understanding of stories from around the world, a 360-degree analysis. An award-winning documentary